Censorship is most dangerous when no one knows it's happening, which is why I think all of this recent noise around Epic Games giving your data to China is just distracting from a more real issue. China has been in our games for years. This is nothing new. So instead of getting upset at a flashy story about the Epic Games Store, here are some ways China has actually influenced your games that you likely don't even know about. As long as video games have been around, there have been those who try to control and censor what we see and play. In America, we usually see this pressure coming from family groups or conservative religious organizations. These conversations typically revolve around violence or explicit sexual content and stem from a more personal moral belief system. In democratic countries that guarantee freedom of speech, this usually doesn't create too much trouble. We all know the narrative. A congressman gets particularly hot on an anti-games tear, draws a straight line from violence in the media to real-world violence, and asserts that these hedonistic boxes our kids are so obsessed with will usher in the fall of man. In reality, our kids aren't being programmed for violence. At worst, they're just turning into this.
Okay, who likes Fortnite?
And in almost every case of a politician rallying against games, it's mostly just because they don't understand them.
It's almost routine in popular games for players to spray other people with Uzis, to drive over pedestrians, to kill police officers, to attack women, and in some cases, even to engage in cannibalism.
But this rarely has a really significant impact on actual game sales, so publishers aren't really given much incentive to change their games to bend to public outcry. In fact, in America, a good controversy will almost always bolster a game's sales. Just look at GTA. But what happens when a country's government has total control over what people can play? And more importantly, when that country is currently the largest gaming market in the world. This brings us back to China. In the last few decades, involvement in the Chinese market has become the key to success for several worldwide industries, entertainment included. For instance, Resident Evil: The Final Chapter only made around half of its budget back in the United States, about $26 million, because those movies are really dumb. But in China, it made an astonishing $159 million. Series like Transformers, The Fast and the Furious, and Pacific Rim owe a large amount of their success, usually at least 50%, to the Chinese box office. And the same is becoming increasingly true for video games. Even a flop can become a major success if you can get China to care about it. In today's current gaming landscape, where anything less than an enormous profit is considered a catastrophic failure, China has become far too big to ignore. Problem is, China has a really long history of censorship, people disappearing, and generally just some pretty problematic shit. So when Western companies want to get in on this market, they've got to play by China's bizarre rules. You see generally progressive-leaning companies like Google cooperating with the Chinese government to censor the internet, until they too were banned. And by all accounts, things seem to have gotten even worse under current leader Xi Jinping, who even banned Winnie the Pooh after the internet decided he looked like him. Currently, games must pass through two separate government agencies before being allowed in China. One that basically decides whether or not the game is morally and culturally okay for public distribution, and one which allows you to actually sell the game. It's a 1984-esque nightmare of bureaucracy that has created a bit of a bottleneck of games waiting to be approved following a total freeze in 2018. When Apple reported losses of $4.8 billion in China in 2018, they said a big reason was the loss of app sales during this freeze. $4.8 billion with a B from Apple alone. That's how f***ing big a deal China is. Common reasons for banning a game include revealing female characters, incorrect values, and far and away the best one, inharmonious chat. Yeah, apparently a game can be banned because the people playing it are acting like assholes. You know, that actually may not be the worst idea. I salute you, Xi. Historically, Chinese censorship really didn't impact us all that much here in the West. But in recent years, that's becoming, unfortunately, less and less true. Take the recent Chinese release of Rainbow Six Siege. Ubisoft removed or changed a number of aesthetic, UI, and background elements from the game in order to get approval in China. It's worth noting that all of the changes that were made were aesthetic only, but a large portion of the game's fan base was furious that anything would be changed to comply with a totalitarian regime halfway across the world. Ubisoft quickly reversed their decision after getting review bombed to hell by angry players, but it makes you wonder, how much of this is going on behind the scenes? Especially close attention needs to be paid to Tencent, the Chinese megacorporation that owns Riot Games, has huge shares in the companies that develop PUBG and Fortnite, and as of 2018, have at least 5% stakes in both Activision Blizzard and Ubisoft. They also host several major online games in China. Tencent also made one of the most unabashedly dystopian games I've ever seen. It's called Excellent Speech, Clap for Xi Jinping, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're encouraged to clap as many times as possible after each clip Xi Jinping plays, with reportedly over 1 billion claps registered so far. And that's the game. That's it. You clap for Xi Jinping. And that's made by the same people that own 100% of Riot Games. Think about that next time you're mid-laning a big old teddy bear. There's definitely business incentive for these games to cater to a Chinese audience, and unless they take the Rainbow Six route and wait until the game is out to make changes, it's likely the rest of the world would actually never even notice. These changes that developers are willing to make to appease China could start to actually have some real magnitude though. Take for instance some theories buzzing around about the removal of the Witch Doctor in Diablo Immortal, a game largely marketed to China. Some are claiming he was removed simply because black characters don't sell as well in China. Now, we have no way of verifying if this is actually why the character was removed from the game, but if that argument holds any weight, that is an incredibly slippery slope. Some companies have avoided this controversy simply by making China-only versions of their games. World of Warcraft and Dota 2 are both examples of huge games that have done this. This way, the global audience gets to experience the game that they always have, and players in China get all the same mechanics and gameplay, but with some censored aesthetic elements. Another option is to just make an entire game that's only for China. That's exactly what Activision did with Call of Duty Online, a free-to-play game pieced together with recycled assets that is absolutely teeming with microtransactions. Now, normally a COD game would have trouble in this market because, well, they involve a whole lot of shooting and death. But since Online was made specifically for China, they made the characters cyborgs instead of real people, making it acceptable by government standards. Oh, and Captain America was in the trailer. Due to a still recent lift on a long ban on consoles by the Chinese government, it's a pretty PC-heavy country. Making a game for one specific market also allowed Activision to tailor the game's specs to the countrywide standard, which is comparatively low. It should be noted that when a game makes a change, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was made at the direct request of the Chinese government. Like the United States' own scummy review board, the MPAA, how and when certain rules apply and to what can fluctuate greatly depending on the person reviewing it. Games companies are likely preemptively censoring themselves in advance of going before the Chinese review board. GamesIndustry.biz reported in 2018 that, quote, China has been withholding approvals from all South Korean games for some time over a military dispute. It might be annoying that our games change as a result of censorship laws halfway across the world, but let's not forget the fact that for people living in China, most games are unavailable entirely, or at least legally. Look, China is only going to become a more prominent fixture in the global economy. Money is always going to define the paths we take, and we can't stick our heads in the sand. Industries the world over are going to make huge changes to get in on tapping this market. This gold rush is just getting started. But that also means we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. Western companies engaging with the Chinese market is not an inherently bad thing, but it's still up to us as consumers to make sure that things stay above board. To make it clear that if we're going to keep marching towards globalization, we won't tolerate racism, censorship, and abusive business practices along the way. So if you really care about this issue, get informed and follow what's actually happening. Don't get distracted by flashy, half-baked Reddit posts that tell you to hate a store you don't like.
All right, let me know where it's good. Hey everybody, welcome back to Inside Gaming for Friday. Yes! Yes! A little different. I'm James.
I'm Elise.
And I'm Lauren.
And and we're here to talk to you about a little bit of Tom Clancy level intrigue.
Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan, which one does he do?
I don't think he did Jack Reacher.
What's
That's
that,
different.
Mr. President? The Epic's Game Store is spyware. It's using those free games and exclusive deals as an excuse to let the